The Officers Club at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam in Hawaii is one of the most prestigious military social venues in the Pacific. Built with a view of the harbor, with high ceilings, elegant furnishings, and impeccable service, it's the place where senior military leadership conducts important networking and celebrates significant events. On a Friday evening in October, the club was hosting a retirement dinner for Admiral James Morrison, a decorated Navy officer who was ending a 40-year career in military service. The event brought together senior officers from all the military branches stationed in Hawaii, the Navy, Army, Air Force, and Marine Corps. There were generals, admirals, colonels, captains, and senior enlisted personnel. It was the kind of gathering where rank was visible, titles were used, and military hierarchy was on full display. The dress code was formal dress uniforms, which meant that every officer's rank insignia was clearly visible on their shoulders and sleeves. In a room like this, you could immediately see who held power and who didn't. Captain Sarah Chen stood near the back of the hall, nursing a glass of wine and observing the room with the eye of someone who was used to watching and assessing rather than being the center of attention. She was dressed in her Navy dress uniform, which was appropriate for the event, though she had almost not attended. Sarah had decided at the last minute to come to the retirement dinner. Admiral Morrison had been a mentor to her years ago, and she wanted to pay her respects. But she had hoped to remain somewhat anonymous, to come, make a brief appearance, and then leave. That plan changed when she encountered Major Derek Hutchins of the Marine Corps. Sarah had first met Hutchins at a joint operations meeting several months earlier. He was a good-looking man in his mid-40s, with the kind of confident bearing that came from years of military service. He had paid attention to Sarah during that meeting, had made some comments that could have been interpreted as either professional or slightly flirtatious, and had generally seemed interested in her as something other than a professional colleague. Sarah had politely but firmly made clear that she wasn't interested in anything beyond professional interaction. Hutchins had accepted that, or so she thought. But now, as Sarah was standing alone for a moment, examining the buffet table, Hutchins appeared at her side. "Captain Chen," he said, using her rank in a way that seemed to emphasize it, to remind her of where she stood in the hierarchy relative to him. "I'm surprised to see you here. This is usually a gathering for more senior officers." Sarah turned to look at him. She could see his rank insignia, a gold oak leaf on his shoulder, indicating he was a major, which was one rank senior to her captain's rank. "I'm here to pay my respects to Admiral Morrison," Sarah said simply. "He was an important mentor." "Of course," Hutchins said, and there was something in his tone that suggested he didn't quite believe her. "Though I have to say, most captains don't get invitations to this kind of event. What command are you with?" Sarah didn't like the direction this conversation was going. She didn't like the implication that she didn't belong here, that her presence was somehow irregular. "I received a personal invitation from Admiral Morrison," Sarah said, keeping her voice level and professional. "Well, that's nice," Hutchins said, and he was smiling, but there was something condescending in the smile. "You know, if you ever want to talk about how to position yourself for advancement, I'd be happy to help. I've made major, and if you work the right way, you could eventually make it to captain. It takes strategy, though. A lot of women don't understand that." Sarah felt anger rise in her chest. The comment was dismissive on multiple levels. It suggested she needed his help, it suggested that captaincy was the apex of her potential, and it reduced her to a woman who might not understand the game of military advancement. "I appreciate the offer," Sarah said coldly, "but I don't need advice from you." "Don't be defensive," Hutchins said, and now his tone had shifted to one of false concern. "I'm just trying to be helpful. Not all women handle rank competition well. You seem like someone who could benefit from some guidance." Before Sarah could respond, someone called out, "Captain Chen. There you are. I've been looking for you." Sarah turned to see Commander Patricia Williams, the aide to Admiral David Harrison, one of the senior Navy officers at the event. "Patricia," Sarah said, immediately turning toward her. "Admiral Harrison would like to speak with you," Williams said. "He's in the private dining room. If you could come with me." Sarah excused herself from Hutchins without another word and followed Williams out of the main hall. As they walked, Williams whispered, "I saw you talking to Major Hutchins. He's been making comments about you all evening. Admiral Harrison heard about it and wanted to make sure you were all right." "I'm fine," Sarah said, though she appreciated the support. "Just the usual kind of dismissive behavior." They arrived at the private dining room, where Admiral David Harrison was seated with several other very senior officers. Harrison was a four-star admiral, one of the highest-ranking officers in the Navy. He was in his 60s, with gray at his temples and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in positions of significant authority. When he saw Sarah, he stood up. "Captain Chen," he said, extending his hand warmly. "I'm glad you could join me. I wanted to make sure you were having a good evening at the retirement dinner." "Yes, sir," Sarah said, shaking his hand. "Thank you for having the invitation extended. It means a lot to be here for Admiral Morrison." "Come, sit with us," Harrison said, gesturing to a chair that had been placed for her. "I want you to meet some people." Over the next hour, Sarah found herself in the company of some of the most senior military leadership in the Pacific Theater. She was introduced to a five-star admiral who served on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to general officers from multiple service branches, to senior leaders of some of the largest military installations in the world. They asked her questions about her work. They listened to her answers with genuine interest. They treated her as a professional colleague, not as a junior officer to be managed or condescended to. Sarah realized that she was being deliberately brought into this inner circle, being made visible to these senior leaders, being positioned as someone worth knowing. When the evening was ending, Admiral Harrison pulled her aside. "Sarah," he said, using her first name in a way that indicated a level of familiarity and respect, "I want you to know that I'm aware of the struggles that women officers face in this military. I'm also aware of how good you are at your job. The people I introduced you to tonight, they all know who you are now. And they know that you're someone to watch." "Thank you, sir," Sarah said. "I appreciate that." "Before you leave," Harrison said, "I need to ask you something. Has Major Hutchins been making inappropriate comments to you?" Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to make a formal complaint. She just wanted to do her job. "He made a comment that felt dismissive," Sarah said carefully. "But nothing I would consider actionable." "I see," Harrison said. "Well, let me be clear about something. Dismissive comments from junior officers towards senior officers are not acceptable. And I want you to know that if there's ever an issue, you should come to me. Not because you need protection, but because this kind of behavior needs to be addressed." Sarah left the officers' club that evening feeling confused. She had come hoping to remain somewhat invisible, to pay her respects and leave. Instead, she had been brought into the company of some of the most senior leadership in the military, had been subtly warned about Hutchins, and had been given what felt like a promise of protection from one of the most powerful officers in the Navy. She didn't understand why Admiral Harrison was paying such close attention to her, or what it meant for her future. At home, Sarah did something she rarely did. She reviewed her own service record and thought about her career trajectory. She had been in the Navy for 18 years. She had achieved the rank of captain through consistent excellence in her field, naval operations and strategy. She had served in various commands, had received commendations for her work, had gradually risen through the ranks. But she had also always been careful to stay somewhat below the radar. She had done excellent work, but she hadn't sought attention or advancement aggressively. She had, in some ways, made herself invisible. And now, Admiral Harrison was making her visible. The next morning, Sarah was at her duty station, a large naval operations center near Pearl Harbor. She was reviewing operational reports when her commanding officer, Captain Michael Torres, asked her to come into his office. "Sarah," Torres said, closing the door behind her, "I need to tell you something that I wasn't going to tell you, but I think you should know. There was a conversation yesterday between Admiral Harrison and several senior officers in the Pacific Theater. Your name came up. Harrison made it clear that you're considered one of the rising stars in the Navy, that he expects big things from your career, and that anyone who has issues with you being in positions of authority should probably reconsider their attitude. Sarah felt her face flush. I don't understand why he would do that. Because, Torres said, he sees something in you that's worth developing. And he's also apparently aware that you've been encountering some resistance from officers like Hutchins who are uncomfortable with women in leadership positions. He's making it clear that this resistance is not welcome. That afternoon, Sarah saw Major Hutchins in the cafeteria. He was standing in line for lunch, and when he saw Sarah, he immediately walked over to her. Captain Chen, he said, and his tone was completely different from the night before. It was respectful, almost deferential. I wanted to apologize for my comments at the officers' club. I was out of line. I hope you can forgive me. Sarah realized in that moment that word of Admiral Harrison's comments had gotten back to Hutchins. Hutchins had learned that Sarah was someone worth treating carefully, someone with allies at the highest levels of military leadership. The apology felt hollow because it was motivated by fear of consequences, not by genuine understanding of why his comments had been inappropriate. But Sarah accepted it anyway. I appreciate that, Major. Over the next several months, Sarah noticed a subtle shift in how people treated her at her duty station and in professional meetings. Officers who had previously been dismissive were now respectful. She was invited to meetings that had previously been above her level. Senior leaders seemed to know who she was and seemed to take her opinion seriously. She knew that this shift was because of Admiral Harrison's interventions, because he had made clear to people in positions of power that she was someone to take seriously. It was flattering and also, in some ways, unsettling. She didn't want advancement because a powerful man had decided to champion her. She wanted advancement because of her competence and excellence. But she also knew that the military system didn't always work that way. Sometimes, you needed someone to believe in you and to use their power to make your competence visible to others. Then, in January, 6 months after the Officers' Club incident, Sarah received an official notification. She had been selected for promotion to Commodore, one rank above captain, the last rank before reaching flag officer status. The promotion was significant. It meant that she would have command authority over a large fleet. It meant that she would be approaching the upper echelons of the Navy hierarchy. The notification also included a note: Admiral Harrison had personally recommended her for the position. Sarah sat with the notification for a long time, processing what it meant. She had always known she was competent. She had always believed she could rise in the Navy. But she had assumed she would do it gradually, over many years, proving herself step by step. Instead, Admiral Harrison had accelerated her timeline by making her visible to senior leaders, by using his power and his credibility to validate her competence. That evening, she called the one person she knew would understand what this meant, her father, a retired Navy captain who had served for 30 years. "Dad," she said, "I got promoted. I'm going to be a Commodore." "Sarah, that's incredible," her father said. "That's a significant advancement. You should be very proud." "I am," Sarah said. "But it feels, I don't know, like someone else did it for me." Her father was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, let me tell you something I learned in my career. There are two kinds of advancement in the military. There's the advancement that comes from doing excellent work and hoping someone notices. And there's the advancement that comes when someone with power notices your excellence and decides to champion you. The second kind doesn't diminish the first. It just makes sure that your excellence is actually recognized." "But what if I haven't earned it?" Sarah asked. "You have earned it," her father said firmly. "You earned it through 18 years of excellent service. Admiral Harrison didn't give you the promotion because he was being nice. He promoted you because you're competent and capable. He just made sure that other people understood that." Sarah's promotion ceremony was held at the naval base, a formal affair with her commanding officer, her family, and various colleagues attending. When she put on the Commodore's uniform for the first time, with the captain's shoulder board that indicated her new rank, she felt the weight of it. This was real. This was not something that had been given to her. This was something she had earned and that had been recognized by the most senior leaders in the Navy. She was no longer just a captain. She was a commodore, one step below flag officer rank, one of the most senior women in the Navy. And it had all started with a dismissive comment from Major Hutchins and Admiral Harrison deciding that her competence deserved to be visible. Commodore Sarah Chen's new position was as the commanding officer of a naval fleet that included multiple ships, thousands of personnel, and responsibility for operations across a large section of the Pacific Ocean. It was the kind of command that was typically held by senior officers with decades of experience. Sarah had the experience, but she was also younger than many officers at her level, which made some people question whether she truly deserved the position. She was aware of the skepticism from the moment she took command. During her first meeting with the captains of the ships under her command, one of them, Captain James Wellington, who was a year older than Sarah and who had apparently expected to get the command himself, made his feelings clear. "Commodore Chen," he said, and his use of her new title felt slightly mocking, "we're going to need to establish clear protocols for how you want things run. Some of us have been in the Navy long enough to know what works and what doesn't." The implication was clear: he had been in the Navy longer than her, and therefore his experience should take precedence over her judgment. Sarah met his challenge directly. "Captain Wellington," she said, "I'm aware of your service record. It's impressive. And I value the experience that you and the other senior captains bring to this command. But I want to be clear about something: I earned this position through my own competence and experience. Admiral Harrison didn't promote me because I have a powerful mentor. He promoted me because I'm qualified for this role. And I will be leading this fleet based on my judgment, not based on deference to officers who have been here longer." Wellington's expression hardened, but he didn't respond. Over the next several months, Sarah worked to establish herself as a competent, decisive commander. She reviewed operational procedures and made improvements. She got to know each captain and their strengths. She built relationships with the crew. She demonstrated that she knew what she was doing and that she was not simply a token appointment. Gradually, the skepticism from the captains began to fade. They started to see that she was making good decisions, that her leadership was improving fleet operations, that she cared about the people under her command. But the skepticism from other parts of the Navy didn't disappear as easily. In meetings with other senior officers, Sarah still encountered the assumption that she had advanced because of Admiral Harrison's support rather than because of her own competence. Some officers seemed to treat her as a junior officer who had gotten lucky rather than as a peer. Sarah decided to address this directly. She asked for a meeting with Admiral Harrison. "Sir," she said when they met in his office, "I want to discuss something. You've been very supportive of my career, and I'm grateful for that. But I'm concerned that people see me as advancing because of your sponsorship rather than because of my competence. How do I change that perception?" Harrison listened thoughtfully. "That's a perceptive concern," he said. "And I understand why you feel that way. But here's what I want to tell you: every officer who achieves senior rank has someone who believed in them, who used their power to make that officer's competence visible. That's how the system works. The difference is that most officers who have mentors are men, and it's seen as normal. When a woman has a mentor, people assume she must not be competent on her own. So what do I do?" Sarah asked. "You do what you're already doing," Harrison said. "You do excellent work. You make decisions that improve operations. You lead effectively. You make your competence undeniable. And you don't apologize for having supporters. Those supports are part of the system. Acknowledging them doesn't diminish your own achievements." "But," Sarah started. "There is no but," Harrison said firmly. "You are a competent commodore. You have command of a fleet. You're making excellent decisions. The fact that I believed in you and made sure you got the opportunity to prove yourself doesn't change the fact that you're proving it every single day. Trust that." Over the next year, Commodore Chen's reputation grew. Her fleet achieved higher operational readiness scores than they had under previous commanders. Crew satisfaction ratings improved. She implemented several innovations that were adopted by other fleets. She was respected by her captains and by the personnel under her command. She was also increasingly visible in senior Navy circles. She was asked to speak at conferences about naval operations. She was invited to meetings with the highest-ranking Navy leadership. She was becoming known not as the woman who got promoted because of her mentor, but as the competent commodore who runs an excellent fleet. Then, in the spring of the following year, something happened that tested everything Sarah had built. One of the ships in her fleet, the USS Washington, had an accident during training operations. A junior officer made a navigational error that caused the ship to collide with a buoy, damaging the hull. Fortunately, no one was seriously injured, but the damage to the ship was significant, and the incident was embarrassing for the fleet. The investigation that followed was thorough and critical. Questions were asked about whether Sarah, as the fleet commander, had adequate oversight procedures in place. Some senior officers suggested that the accident indicated a lack of discipline in her command. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. This was the kind of incident that could derail a career. If people decided that the accident was her fault, if they determined that she wasn't capable of commanding a fleet, then all of her achievements would be overshadowed by this failure. She immediately contacted Admiral Harrison. "Sir," she said, "we've had an accident on the USS Washington. I want to brief you on what happened and what we're doing about it." Sarah walked him through the incident, the investigation, and the corrective measures she had implemented. She explained that the accident was not due to inadequate command structure but due to a single junior officer's error, the kind of error that could happen in any fleet. Harrison listened and then said something that surprised her. "Sarah, you need to understand something. This accident doesn't define you as a commander. What defines you is how you respond to it. You've already done the right things, you've conducted a thorough investigation, you've implemented corrective measures, you're being transparent about what happened. That's what good command looks like. But some people are saying it indicates a problem with my leadership," Sarah said. "Some people will say that," Harrison agreed. "But I want you to know something, I have complete confidence in your command. This incident doesn't change that. And I'm going to make sure the Navy leadership understands that this is an isolated incident, not a pattern." Just as he had done when she was a captain, Admiral Harrison used his power and his credibility to influence how the Navy interpreted events. He called senior leaders. He made clear that he stood by Sarah's command. He framed the incident as an individual error in a well-run fleet, not as a sign of systemic problems. And the narrative changed. Instead of an incident that indicated problematic leadership, it became an isolated error in an otherwise excellent command. Sarah made note of this. Admiral Harrison was not just sponsoring her advancement. He was actively using his power to protect her from the kinds of career-damaging incidents that could derail an officer. It was both reassuring and unsettling. 6 months after the USS Washington incident, Sarah was promoted to Rear Admiral, 1-star, flag officer rank. It was the kind of promotion that meant she was now among the highest-ranking officers in the Navy, part of a small circle of leaders who made strategic decisions about the entire service. Her promotion ceremony was held at the Pentagon, attended by senior Navy leadership and Admiral Harrison, who sat in the front row. When Sarah received her admiral's insignia, the single star that represented her new rank, she felt the full weight of what she had achieved. She was an admiral. She was among the top leaders of the United States Navy. But she also understood that none of this would have happened if Admiral Harrison hadn't decided to champion her, if he hadn't made her visible to senior leaders, if he hadn't used his power to protect her when she faced obstacles. The question was, what did she do with this understanding? That evening, she had dinner with Admiral Harrison. "You've earned this," he said, looking at her admiral's insignia. "Don't let anyone tell you different." "I know I've earned it," Sarah said. "But I also know that I wouldn't be here without your support. And I'm trying to understand what that means." It means you're smart enough to recognize that the military system is not a pure meritocracy, Harrison said. It's not. Competence matters, but so does visibility, so does having someone believe in you, so does being in the right place at the right time. You were competent, but you were also invisible until I made you visible. Now that you're visible, now that you're an admiral, you have the power to make other competent people visible. That's what you do with this understanding. Sarah nodded slowly. She understood. It wasn't about apologizing for having had support. It was about using the power that support had helped her achieve to help others. But before she could do that, she had to survive the most challenging test of her military career. 3 months after becoming a Rear Admiral Sarah Chen was assigned to the Pacific Fleet Headquarters as the Deputy Commander of Naval Operations for the Pacific region. It was a position of significant authority and responsibility, involving strategic planning and decision-making that affected military operations across 1/3 of the world's ocean surface. It was also a position where she would work directly with Admiral Richard Morrison, the commander of the Pacific Fleet. Morrison was a 4-star admiral, one of the most senior Navy officers in the world. Sarah had never worked directly with Morrison before, though she knew his reputation. He was known as a traditional officer, someone who believed strongly in established protocols and hierarchy. He was also, according to some accounts, skeptical of women in senior leadership positions. Their first meeting was tense. Admiral Chen, Morrison said when she reported to him, using her rank in a way that sounded formal and slightly distant, "I want to be clear about the role I expect from the deputy commander position. This is not a policy position. This is an operational position. I need someone who understands practical naval operations and who can implement my strategic direction. Are you capable of doing that?" Sarah understood what he was really asking. Are you capable of following my orders without trying to change how things are done? Yes, sir, she said. I'm capable of implementing your strategic direction effectively. But she also wanted to add, and I'm also capable of providing input and recommendations when I believe they will improve operations. She didn't say that, not yet. She needed to establish her credibility first. Over the next several months, Sarah worked to understand Admiral Morrison's approach to command and his vision for the Pacific Fleet. She implemented his strategic direction precisely and effectively. She demonstrated that she was capable of managing complex operations. She proved herself to be reliable and competent. Gradually, Morrison's formal distance began to thaw. He started asking for her input on strategic decisions. He started treating her as more of a collaborator than as a subordinate who simply followed orders. Then came the moment that tested everything. The Pacific Fleet was preparing for a major joint exercises with allied nations. The exercise would involve naval assets from multiple countries, complex coordination challenges, and high visibility from the Pentagon and Congress. It was the kind of operation that could either demonstrate the excellence of the Pacific Fleet or expose significant problems. Admiral Morrison asked Sarah to oversee the operational planning for the exercise. Sarah reviewed the existing plans and immediately identified significant problems. The coordination protocols between different national forces were unclear. The communication procedures had gaps that could lead to confusion in high-pressure situations. The contingency planning was inadequate for the complexity of what they were attempting to do. She prepared a comprehensive report documenting the problems and proposing solutions. When she presented the report to Admiral Morrison, his response was not what she expected. "Admiral Chen," he said, his expression hardening, "these plans were developed by senior officers with decades of experience. They've been used in previous exercises. And now you're telling me they're inadequate?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said. "I believe they are inadequate for the scope and complexity of this operation. The gaps I've identified are not minor. They could create real coordination problems that could compromise the exercise and potentially put personnel at risk." "That's a serious accusation," Morrison said. "It's not an accusation," Sarah said firmly. "It's an analysis. And I stand by it." Morrison stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the harbor. Admiral Chen, he said without turning around, I need to ask you something. Are you telling me this because you genuinely believe it's a problem, or because you feel the need to assert yourself, to prove that you have value in this position? It was a confrontational question, one that was directly challenging her motives. Sarah took a breath before responding. Sir, I understand why you might question my motives. I'm new in this position. I haven't earned the credibility that the senior officers who developed these plans have. But I'm telling you what I see in the plans, and I'm doing it because I believe it's important. If you don't trust my analysis, then I suggest you have it reviewed by other officers whose judgment you trust. But I would not be doing my job if I let concerns about my own credibility prevent me from raising legitimate operational issues. Morrison turned around and looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said finally. I'll have your analysis reviewed by a senior operations officer. If there are legitimate problems, we'll address them. But if this turns out to be a matter of you trying to assert authority where you don't have expertise, we're going to have a serious conversation about your role in this fleet. Over the next week, Sarah's analysis was reviewed by Captain Thomas Reynolds, one of the most respected operations officers in the Navy. Reynolds was a 60-year-old officer with 40 years of experience. If anyone had credibility to evaluate Sarah's work, it was him. Reynolds called Sarah into his office after his review. Admiral Chen, he said, I've reviewed your analysis of the joint exercise plans. I want you to know that your concerns are valid. There are significant gaps in the coordination protocols. Your proposed solutions are sound and would significantly improve the likelihood of a successful exercise. You did good work. Sarah felt relief wash through her. Reynolds continued, I'm going to present this analysis to Admiral Morrison. This is going to be attributed to you, not to me. Is that going to be a problem for you? No, sir, Sarah said. I'm comfortable with my analysis being presented as my own work. When Reynolds presented Sarah's analysis to Admiral Morrison, along with his endorsement of it, the response was very different from before. Admiral Chen, Morrison said in his next meeting with her, Captain Reynolds confirmed that your analysis is sound. I want to apologize for questioning your motives. I was wrong to do that. Your observations about the exercise plans are valuable, and we're going to implement your recommended improvements. But more importantly than the apology, Morrison's tone toward Sarah changed fundamentally. He began treating her as a peer rather than as a junior officer he was skeptical of. He started asking for her input on a broader range of operations. He began consulting with her on strategic decisions. The joint exercise proceeded with Sarah's revised plans, and it was extraordinarily successful. Allied forces coordinated effectively. Communications protocols worked smoothly. The exercise demonstrated the exceptional capability of the Pacific Fleet and the quality of its leadership. In the after-action report, Admiral Morrison gave Sarah significant credit for the success of the exercise. He specifically cited her operational planning and her recommendations for improving coordination protocols. The report was distributed throughout the Navy, and Sarah's reputation as a skilled operator grew significantly. A month later, Admiral Morrison called Sarah into his office for a private meeting. Admiral Chen, he said, I want to tell you something. When you first arrived in this position, I was skeptical. I had some doubts about whether you truly deserved your rank, whether you had earned your position or whether you had advanced because of your connections to Admiral Harrison. Sarah felt her stomach tighten, but she waited for him to continue. But you proved those doubts wrong, Morrison said. You did excellent work on the exercise planning. You have shown good judgment and strong operational thinking. And perhaps most importantly, you showed the kind of character that earns respect. You were willing to challenge me when you believed you were right, and you were willing to stand by your analysis even when I questioned your motives. That's the kind of officer I want working for me. Thank you, sir, Sarah said. I also want to tell you something else, Morrison continued. I know that you have Admiral Harrison's support. I know that he championed your career. But what I've seen over the past months is that his support didn't give you the skills to do this job. You already had those skills. He just made sure the Navy recognized them. Don't let anyone diminish what you've accomplished by saying it's because of your connections. Your competence is real. Your achievements are real. Sarah left that meeting feeling something shift inside her. She had spent months wondering if her advancement was legitimate, if she truly deserved her rank. But now, a senior admiral who had initially been skeptical of her, who had actively questioned whether she belonged in her position, had validated her competence and her achievements. The question was no longer whether she deserved her rank. The question had become, what was she going to do with it? That evening, she called Admiral Harrison. "Sir," she said, "I need to talk to you about something." Admiral Morrison said something that made me understand the difference between being sponsored for advancement and earning advancement. He made me realize that you didn't give me my position. You just made sure the Navy looked at me seriously. That's exactly right, Harrison said. And now that they're looking at you seriously, they're seeing exactly what I saw, that you're a competent, excellent officer. I want to do for other officers what you did for me, Sarah said. I want to use my position to make competent people visible, to give them the opportunities they need to prove themselves. That's what I hoped you'd eventually understand, Harrison said. That's the real power of advancement, not just for yourself, but for opening doors for others. Sarah thought about that conversation over the following weeks. She thought about the moments when she had felt invisible, when she had wondered if she belonged. She thought about the moment when Admiral Harrison had decided to champion her, and how that decision had changed the trajectory of her career. And she understood that she was now in a position to do that for others. But first, she had to navigate one more challenge that would test everything she had learned. 6 months into her position as Deputy Commander of Naval Operations for the Pacific, Rear Admiral Sarah Chen was attending a high-level strategic planning meeting at the Pentagon. The meeting included 4-star admirals from all the major fleet commands, senior officials from the Department of Defense, and congressional representatives overseeing military operations. The topic under discussion was resource allocation for the coming fiscal year, which fleet commands would receive increased funding, which would receive reductions, and how military resources would be distributed across the Pacific region. Sarah had prepared extensively for this meeting. She had reviewed budget proposals from multiple commands. She had analyzed operational needs. She had developed recommendations based on strategic priorities. When it came time for her to present her recommendations, she stood up with confidence. She had done this work. She was prepared. But as she was presenting her analysis, Admiral Kenneth Walsh, a 4-star admiral commanding one of the Pacific Fleet's subordinate commands, interrupted her. "Admiral Chen," he said, and his tone was dismissive, "I think we need to remember that these are just preliminary recommendations from a junior flag officer. The decisions about resource allocation should be made by the 4-star admirals who have the strategic perspective to understand the broader implications." It was a calculated put-down. By calling her a junior flag officer, Walsh was trying to make her sound inexperienced and unqualified. By suggesting that only 4-star admirals had the strategic perspective to make decisions, he was implying that her analysis was beneath serious consideration. The room was quiet. This was the kind of moment where officers either stood up for themselves or accepted the dismissal. Sarah took a breath. "Admiral Walsh," she said, her voice calm and measured, "my recommendations are not preliminary. They're based on extensive analysis of operational needs, budget efficiency, and strategic priorities. And while I respect the experience of the 4-star admirals in this room, I don't believe that strategic perspective is exclusive to that rank. I have responsibility for Pacific region operations, and I take that responsibility seriously. If you have specific concerns about my recommendations, I'm happy to address them. But I won't accept the characterization that my analysis is not serious because of my rank." Admiral Morrison, who was Sarah's superior and who was also in the room, watched this exchange carefully. But Walsh wasn't finished. He turned to Admiral Richard Marshall, the 4-star admiral overseeing the entire Pacific Fleet Command structure, and said, "Sir, I respectfully submit that we should table Admiral Chen's recommendations and have a senior officer review them before we consider them further." It was a direct challenge to Sarah's authority and competence, presented in front of the highest-ranking military leadership in the Pentagon. Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. Then Admiral Morrison spoke. "Admiral Walsh," he said, "I've been working with Admiral Chen for the past 6 months. I've reviewed her analysis extensively. And I want to tell you that her recommendations are sound. In fact, they're among the best strategic analyses I've seen from anyone at any rank. I don't think we should table them. I think we should seriously consider them." But Morrison's support, while helpful, wasn't enough to fully counter Walsh's challenge. The meeting continued, and while Sarah's recommendations were discussed, there was a sense that her authority to make them had been questioned. After the meeting, Sarah was in the hallway when Admiral Marshall, the 4-star admiral overseeing the entire Pacific Fleet structure, stopped her. "Admiral Chen," he said, "can we speak privately?" They went into an empty office, and Marshall closed the door. "I want you to know something," Marshall said. "What Admiral Walsh did in that meeting was inappropriate. He was trying to undermine your authority in front of senior leadership. That's a serious breach of professional conduct." "I understand, sir," Sarah said. "But I'm not interested in making a formal complaint about his behavior. I just want to do my job." "I know," Marshall said. "But I want you to understand something important. You belong in that room. Your rank, your position, your authority, all of it is legitimate. And when someone tries to undermine that, it's not just about you. It's about the integrity of the command structure. If we allow senior officers to question the authority of junior flag officers without cause, we're undermining the entire system." He paused, and then said something that surprised Sarah. "I'm going to do something that I don't usually do," Marshall said. "I'm going to call a follow-up meeting with the same group. And I'm going to ask you to present your recommendations again, with me asking questions to demonstrate the thoroughness of your analysis. I'm going to make it very clear to everyone in that room that your recommendations are serious, that your authority is legitimate, and that anyone who questions that without good cause will answer to me. Is that something you would be willing to do?" Sarah realized what Admiral Marshall was doing. Just as Admiral Harrison had used his power to make Sarah visible and to validate her competence, Admiral Marshall was now using his power to protect her authority and to make clear that questioning her was not acceptable. "Yes, sir," Sarah said. "I'm willing to do that." The follow-up meeting was held 2 weeks later. This time, Admiral Marshall asked detailed questions about Sarah's methodology, her assumptions, her analysis. And with each question, Sarah demonstrated the depth and rigor of her work. By the end of the meeting, it was clear to everyone in the room that Sarah's recommendations were serious, substantive, and worthy of serious consideration. Moreover, Admiral Marshall made clear in his concluding remarks, "I want everyone to understand that Rear Admiral Chen's recommendations carry my full support. I believe they represent excellent strategic thinking. And I expect them to be given serious consideration in all subsequent discussions." It was a public validation of Sarah's authority and competence. And it was a clear signal that anyone who wanted to question her authority would have to answer to a 4-star admiral. After the meeting, Admiral Walsh approached Sarah privately. "Admiral Chen," he said, "I owe you an apology. My comments in the previous meeting were out of line. I let my own concerns about resource allocation for my command cloud my professional judgment. I'm sorry." Sarah accepted the apology, though she understood that it had come only because Admiral Marshall had made clear that Walsh's behavior was unacceptable. Over the following months, the implications of what had happened became clear. Sarah's recommendations were implemented. They led to improved resource allocation across the Pacific Fleet. And Sarah's reputation as a skilled strategist and analyst grew significantly. But more importantly, Sarah had learned something crucial about power in military institutions. Power was not just about rank. It was about having allies who were willing to use their power on your behalf. Admiral Harrison had believed in her and had made her visible. Admiral Morrison had validated her work and supported her when she was challenged. Admiral Marshall had protected her authority when it was questioned. None of these officers had acted out of personal obligation. They had acted because they believed Sarah was competent and because they believed that supporting her served the institution. But the support had been essential to her success. That evening, Sarah called Admiral Harrison. "Sir," she said, "I want to tell you about an incident that happened. A senior admiral challenged my authority in a meeting, and Admiral Marshall stepped in to support me. And I realized that without that support, my recommendations might not have been taken seriously." "That's how the system works," Harrison said. "Competence matters, but so does having people believe in you and willing to support you. Are you angry about that?" "No," Sarah said. "I'm grateful for the support. But I'm also aware that there are competent officers out there who don't have anyone supporting them. And I want to be for them what you and Admiral Morrison and Admiral Marshall have been for me." "Then that's what you do," Harrison said. "You find competent officers who need someone to believe in them. And you use your power to make them visible. You use your power to protect them when they face resistance. You use your power to open doors." Sarah understood now. This was the real purpose of reaching senior rank in a military institution. It wasn't just about advancing yourself. It was about using your position to help others advance, to break down barriers, to ensure that competence was recognized and rewarded regardless of background. A month later, Sarah identified a young captain, a woman from a non-traditional background who had exceptional potential, and began advocating for her advancement. She made sure the captain was invited to important meetings. She gave her opportunities to present work to senior leaders. She used her power to make the captain visible. It was the beginning of what would become a pattern throughout Sarah's career, identifying talented officers and using her position to help them succeed. But before Sarah could fully step into this role, she would face one more challenge that would define her career. 2 years after the incident with Admiral Walsh, Rear Admiral Sarah Chen was recommended for promotion to Vice Admiral, 2 stars, another significant step up the Navy hierarchy. The recommendation came from Admiral Morrison, who had become one of her strongest advocates. But the promotion process was not automatic. Sarah's record was reviewed by the highest-ranking Navy leadership, including the Chief of Naval Operations, who was the highest-ranking officer in the entire Navy. During the review process, Sarah learned that there had been some resistance to her promotion. Some officers still questioned whether she had advanced too quickly, whether she truly deserved her current rank, whether she had earned her position or whether she had simply benefited from Admiral Harrison's sponsorship. The same doubts that had followed her throughout her career were still there, just more muted now. But this time, when the question of her promotion was being discussed at the highest levels, something unexpected happened. Admiral Richard Marshall, the 4-star admiral who had defended her authority when Admiral Walsh challenged it, personally went to the Chief of Naval Operations and made the case for Sarah's promotion. "Admiral Chen has demonstrated exceptional competence," Marshall said, according to the account Sarah later heard. "She has made sound strategic decisions. She has managed complex operations effectively. And she has shown the kind of character and integrity that we need in the highest levels of Navy leadership. I don't just recommend her promotion. I strongly recommend it." The Chief of Naval Operations approved Sarah's promotion to Vice Admiral. Sarah's promotion to 2-star Admiral was announced in the summer, with the formal ceremony scheduled for the following month at the Pentagon. A week before the ceremony, Admiral Harrison called Sarah. "I'm going to be there for your promotion," he said. "I wanted you to know that. I know it's been a long journey, but I'm proud of what you've accomplished." "Thank you, sir," Sarah said. "I'm grateful for your support. For everything." "Sarah," Harrison said, and his voice was serious, "I want to tell you something. You have now reached a level of rank where you have genuine power in this institution. You can affect policy. You can influence personnel decisions. You can shape the direction of the Navy. I want you to use that power responsibly. Use it to open doors for people who deserve the opportunity to prove themselves. Use it to change the system so that competence is recognized regardless of background. Will you do that? Yes, sir, Sarah said. I will. Sarah's promotion ceremony to Vice Admiral was held in the Pentagon in a large auditorium with hundreds of officers attending. The Chief of Naval Operations presided over the ceremony. Admirals from all the major fleet commands attended. And Admiral Harrison sat in the front row, watching as Sarah received the insignia of a Vice Admiral, 2 stars, representing a position among the most senior leaders in the entire Navy. As the Chief of Naval Operations pinned the 2nd star on Sarah's uniform, he made remarks about her exceptional service and her potential to continue advancing within the Navy. But the most meaningful moment came after the ceremony, when Admiral Marshall, Admiral Morrison, and Admiral Harrison all came up to her together. "Congratulations, Admiral Chen," Morrison said, shaking her hand. "Thank you, sir," Sarah said. "I want to tell you something," Morrison said. "When you first came to work for me, I was skeptical of you. I questioned whether you truly deserved your rank. You proved me wrong. And you did it not by seeking my approval or by trying to win me over. You did it by doing excellent work and standing up for what you believed in. That's what made the difference." After the ceremony, Sarah was walking through the Pentagon corridors when she encountered Admiral Kenneth Walsh, the officer who had challenged her authority years earlier. Walsh immediately came to attention and saluted her. "Admiral Chen," he said, "congratulations on your promotion." Sarah returned the salute. "Thank you, Admiral Walsh," she said. As she continued walking, Sarah reflected on how much had changed. Years ago, Admiral Walsh had tried to diminish her authority. Now he was saluting her as a superior officer. That change had not come because of her rank. Sarah had done the same job before and after her promotion. The change had come because the external symbols of authority had finally caught up with her actual competence. Over the next several years, Vice Admiral Sarah Chen rose to positions of increasing authority within the Navy. She served as the Deputy Commander of Naval Operations, a position of significant strategic importance. She was consulted on major military decisions. She helped shape Navy policy and strategy. And throughout her career, she mentored young officers, particularly women and officers from underrepresented backgrounds, helping them navigate the military hierarchy and positioning them for advancement. She identified promising officers and made sure they were visible to senior leaders. She advocated for their promotion when they were ready. She protected their authority when they faced resistance. She did for them what Admiral Harrison and Admiral Morrison and Admiral Marshall had done for her. By the time Vice Admiral Chen was in her late 50s, she had become one of the most respected and influential officers in the Navy. She had trained dozens of officers who had gone on to senior positions. She had changed how the Navy approached diversity and inclusion in leadership. She had demonstrated, through her own career and through the officers she had helped advance, that competence and excellence could come from anywhere in the organization. Then, one autumn day, Sarah received a call from the Chief of Naval Operations. "Admiral Chen," the CNO said, "I'm recommending you for promotion to full admiral, 4 stars. The recommendation will go to the President for approval, but I wanted to tell you personally before it becomes official." 4 stars. The highest rank in the Navy. One of only a handful of officers held that rank at any given time. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. She had come so far from that moment in the officers' club when Captain Hutchins had tried to dismiss her, when Admiral Harrison had stood up for her. "Thank you, sir," she said. "I'm honored." "You've earned it," the CNO said simply. Sarah's promotion to Admiral, 4 stars, was formally announced the following month. The Senate confirmed the promotion unanimously. The ceremony was held at the Pentagon, with the President in attendance. As President presented Sarah with her 4th star, the entire room stood and applauded. Generals and admirals from all the military branches stood in respect for what she had achieved. In the front row, watching with pride, were Admiral Robert Harrison, now fully retired but still active in military circles, Admiral Morrison, who had become one of the most senior strategic advisors in the Navy, and Admiral Marshall, who had stepped down from command but who remained influential in Navy leadership. All three of them had believed in Sarah at different points in her career. All three had used their power to support her, to make her visible, to protect her authority when it was challenged. And now Sarah, at the highest rank the Navy could offer, was prepared to use that power to help the next generation of officers climb the same mountain she had climbed. After the ceremony, Sarah had a private moment with Admiral Harrison. "Remember that day at the officers' club?" Harrison asked. "When you stood up to that major?" "I remember," Sarah said. "I decided in that moment that you were someone worth believing in," Harrison said. "Not because you needed my help to succeed. But because I believed the military needed officers like you in the highest positions. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. And I'm prouder still of how you're using your power to help others. It's because of what you taught me," Sarah said. "You showed me that power isn't about dominance. It's about opening doors for competent people to prove themselves." That evening, Sarah stood in her dress uniform, looking at the 4 stars on her shoulder. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a captain being mocked in a mess hall by a major to an admiral, the highest rank in the Navy. From someone questioning whether she belonged in a room with senior officers to someone who was among the most senior officers in the entire military. From wondering if her advancement was legitimate to knowing that she had earned every step. She thought about the Marine, Major Derek Hutchins, who had tried to flex his rank on her years ago. He had attempted to use the hierarchy to diminish her, to remind her of where she stood relative to him. But that hierarchy had ultimately worked in her favor. She had climbed it, step by step, with the help of mentors who believed in her. And now she stood at the very top. But the most important thing was not where she stood. It was what she would do with the power of that position. Admiral Sarah Chen committed herself in that moment to using her 4-star authority to transform the Navy. To make sure that officers from all backgrounds could advance. To ensure that competence was recognized and rewarded. To open doors for the next generation of leaders. She would be for others what Admiral Harrison had been for her, a voice of power saying, "I believe in you. Your competence matters. You belong here." And in that commitment, she understood the true meaning of her entire journey. It had never been just about her advancement. It had always been about changing the system so that the next person wouldn't have to fight as hard, wouldn't have to overcome as many obstacles, wouldn't have to wonder if they truly belonged. That was the legacy she would leave. And as she stood in the Pentagon, surrounded by the symbols of her authority, surrounded by officers who had helped her reach this position, Admiral Sarah Chen smiled knowing that the real work, the work of opening doors for others, was only now beginning.